This morning comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 13. If I speak in the tongues of mortals and angels, but do not have love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give away all my possessions, and if I hand over my body so that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient, love is kind, love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoings, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. But as for prophecies, they will come to an end. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will come to an end. For we know only in part, and we prophesy only in part. But when the complete comes, the partial will come to an end. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became an adult, I put an end to childish ways. For now, we see in a mirror dimly, but then we will see face to face. Now, I only know in part. Then I will know fully, even as I have been fully known. And now faith, hope, and love abide, these three. And the greatest of these is love. This is the word of the Lord. Now, please.
I feel like I should make a little bit of a explanation for that prayer that we lifted up at the beginning. When I was lifting up, when I was writing that prayer that was printed in the bulletin and was up on the screen earlier in the week, I was remembering that we have a very broad use of the word love in the English language. And you know, one of the issues of translation when you go from one language to another can very often be that a word that maybe literally means the same thing in one language as in another, very often will have a broader use in one language or the other, or it'll have a more specialized use. And one of the favorite examples that I've heard used in the past is like in the Inuit language with the Eskimos and so forth. You know, we in the English language have one word for snow. And in this part of the world, we don't use it very often. But in that part of the world, they use a whole series of words for snow, different types of snow, different qualities to a particular type of snowfall, or the way the snow blows and so forth, because that's right in the middle of what they deal with. And I know in the biblical languages, when it comes to the word love is more specialized in the Greek language. In fact, you've got, at least that I know of, 3 different words that we would translate into English as love. So you've got, say, for example, the kind of a love between a man and a woman who are romantically interested in each other, and that's eros, and then there's the kind of love between comrades, or what we might call brotherly love, philo. And then there is the love that God has for us and which He calls us to have for one another. It's divine love. It's called agape. And so there's a more specialized sense. And, so one of the things that, having studied those sorts of things and being aware of that reality, and then also in the English language, we've got one word, love, that just covers a whole range of things, whether it's, we're talking about the love we have for our family members, the love we have for our spouses and for our kids, and the love that we have for God. And then we use that same word when we're talking about how we love pizza, or the donuts that many of us enjoyed this morning before coming into the worship center. I mean, there's just such a broad use of the word love, and of course, love in our world today, well, let's face it, in our world since the beginning of time has been a very important concept. The idea of love occupies a great deal of attention in our world. The idea of finding love, falling in love or falling out of love, true love, how to know when it's love, when we feel loved or lovable or are not feeling loved or feeling unlovable. What is love? The very definition often seems to escape us. In fact, I've often heard it said that you can't define love, and yet we find in that passage that Henry read a few moments ago what I think is the best definition, the most complete definition of the character of love that has ever been written. So love is important. And all of these ideas about love and so much more carry throughout our literature. As long as there has been something known as literature or art, the idea of love has been absolutely intertwined with that literature, along with so many other themes. And it is that idea that these things we talk about as followers of Jesus, as the people of God, are so ingrained in who we are, that we find, whether they meant to or not, very often in literature, you find things that point us toward the gospel. And that's kind of the idea behind this new series that I'm starting this morning, is that, we find in the movies, and I'm calling this series Meeting Jesus at the Movies, we find in the movies these themes that can be connected, even if unintentionally, can be connected to the things we find in the Bible, the principles of the gospel and God's love for us. So, as we're going to see from this new series, my hope is that you're going to see some of these most popular ideas and the stories we tell, that they pluck this chord in our souls, and that's what makes them good movies, because they connect us to that ultimate story. Or at least, even if it's a dim imitation, they evoke that idea of the greatest story ever told, the story of God reconciling the world unto himself through the person and the work of Jesus Christ. These stories, these ideas, they compel us because there is a greater story that is written in our hearts from before the foundations of the earth. The idea of love, and indeed the greatest, most profound kind of love, is just one such story. And when Jana and I this is why I'm starting with a kids movie as an illustration in this series. When Jana and I took our kids to see Frozen several years ago, they were much littler then, and in fact, some have wondered out loud when they've been seeing what we showed at movie night last week, and what I'm going to be centering this message around. Why in the world is he starting with some kids' Disney movie? But when Jana and I took the kids several years ago to see that movie, the story of the ultimate love that God has for us came through to me during that movie, and I know that the authors did not intend it to be so, in a powerful way. And seeing that closing scene kind of changed the entire movie experience up until that point for me. But before I get too deeply into that, I want to read to you from the story of Jesus about that greatest kind of love. So our gospel reading this morning comes from the 15th chapter of the Gospel according to John, and we're going to read verses 9 through 13. And this is a little piece of Jesus' kind of closing discourse with his disciples before he goes to the cross. He's about to illustrate this love to them in the most profound way that they can't even begin to understand at that point. But Jesus has some important things he wants to tell the disciples, and this is perhaps one of the most important things. So hear these words from John chapter 15, 9 through 13. As the Father has loved me, says Jesus, so I have loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. I've said these things to you so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, than to lay down one's life for one's friends. This, brothers and sisters, is the word of God. Thanks be to God. Amen. Now, in a moment, Schaefer's going to jump up and get a clip started for you. And so in a moment, we're going to show this little clip from the movie Frozen, and it's a couple of minutes long. And as we're doing that, I just want to give you a spoiler alert, because this comes from the end of the movie. This is what reveals everything. So I hope you've either seen that movie by now, or you're not going to see it. If that's the case, if you are going to see it, just be warned. I'm about to ruin the movie for you. But I want to set up the scene first, because, like I said, this does come from the end of the movie. And the characters that we're interested in this movie, we've got Elsa, and she is in some ways the main character. But her sister Anna is also really, I think she kind of competes for the lead role in this, at least in my observation of the movie. And so they're sisters. They're both princesses. They're daughters of a king and queen. And along the way during this movie, kind of early on as the movie plays out, the parents are lost at sea. They're gone from the movie. They're no longer in the story. And Anna and Elsa are kind of raised by the servants in the castle. And but before the parents disappear from the story, there's a scene where Anna and Elsa are playing, and Elsa has discovered that she has this power, and it's this power to freeze things. And so she can, I guess, somehow or another take the moisture from the air and turn that into solid water, which is ice, and just freeze things with this power that she's got. Okay, Anna and Elsa, apparently when Elsa uses this power, if she makes a snowman, apparently it can come to life. So he becomes another character in the movie, a snowman by the name of Olaf, and he doesn't even have to wear that top hat that we know about from another story about an animate snowman. But he's kind of the comic relief in the movie. And anyway, so as the story progresses, she's using this power on that day that they create the snowman, and accidentally Elsa injures her sister Anna, whom she loves dearly. And she injures her by hitting her with that power, and somehow it does something in her brain, and so she's knocked unconscious. Her parents, again, this is before they disappear from the story, take her to this tribe of rock trolls. And these rock trolls are magical, and they somehow find a way to restore her to health, but they say the memory of this event and that power must be absolutely erased from Anna's memory. And so she can never use that power again. So there's a tension as the movie progresses where she is challenged not to use that power that she just can't help but use. It just sort of comes out when she least expects it, especially when there's emotions involved. As they grow older, then their relationship is separate. Because of what Elsa has accidentally done to her sister, their relationship is broken. And though Anna, who doesn't remember this horrific event, begs her and begs her, do you want to make a snowman? She turns it down over and over again until they grow older, and then the time comes for the older sister, Elsa, to inherit the throne. And during this coronation ceremony, this new character appears on the scene, a guy by the name of Hans. And Hans is this dashing young prince, and he seems like he's going to be the hero of the story. But we find out he's not. In fact, he's actually quite the villain, and very devious. He ends up displaying himself to be a liar, and anyway, so then there's this other male character that appears, a guy by the name of Christoph, who seems to want to rescue Anna and protect her from all manner of trouble. But Anna seems to just want to handle everything herself and is actually quite capable. So there's a kind of a relationship that begins to develop between them, even though Anna has already developed a kind of an infatuation for Hans. So Hans, we're starting to think he's going to be this prince that rescues the young princess. And then we've got Christoph, he's sort of a bumbling character, but he's a very likable bumbling character. And then I should mention that his reindeer Sven is also a character in the story. I say that because you're going to see him in just a minute. But anyway, so the setup for this is Elsa is unable to control her power, and she ends up going on the run. And her inability to control her power causes the entire land of Arendelle to be affected and to be frozen into an unseasonable winter in the middle of summer. And so then it seems like it's this curse that is laid on the land, and the curse needs to be broken. In addition to that, Elsa's power accidentally strikes Anna once more. And Anna now has been hit in the heart, and her heart is beginning to freeze. And progressively, she gets colder and colder. And when we get to this scene that you're about to see, she's on the verge of dying. But yet Hans has lied to her about his love for her. She was expecting, because these rock trolls once again came into the story, and they share sort of a prophecy. And that prophecy is that only an act of true love is going to break the curse. And so since this is a Disney movie, I, along with probably many of other folks who saw it, kind of got fished into this idea that it was going to be true love's kiss, like so many of the other traditional Disney movies that we've seen. But that is not the case. You begin to wonder, is it going to be Hans? Is it going to be Kristoff? And then Hans reveals himself to be quite an ugly character. He's lied about his love for Anna. He just wants power and control. And he wants to ascend to the throne. And Anna seems to be his way to do that if he can just get Elsa out of the way, and he begins to make the case that the only thing to be done is to kill Elsa to break the curse on the land. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and let you watch this scene, and we'll pick back up in just a moment. In that moment, as I watched that movie and seeing that scene and hearing those words, it changed the entire movie from beginning to end for me. It became in that moment an interesting parallel between the gospel message, that greatest story ever told, the greatest and truest story ever told, and this story. It grabbed my attention only at the end of the movie. It became no longer just some Disney kids movie to endure, but instead it became a work that pointed me to the gospel message. Elsa's inability to control her power created a division in relationship, a division between her and Anna and her and the rest of the kingdom. It broke her relationship with those closest to her as well as all of creation. And Anna becomes something of a Christ figure. So even our broken relationship with God is symbolized here. Elsa's sin didn't just affect her relationship with Anna, but affected her relationship with all of creation. All of Arendelle is affected by the curse of this power that she has at her disposal, just as all of creation is affected by original sin and by our sin. And as Hans rightly stated, Elsa couldn't run away from it. He started with that truth, even though he turned it into a lie. That was true. She can't run away from her sin, and we can't run away from our sin any more than she could run away from what she had done, any more than Adam and Eve could hide in the garden from God. And back to Hans, like the devil, he first appears as an attractive, charismatic character who begins with the truth but twists it into a lie, or as I've heard a Christian apologist say, takes the skin of the truth and stuffs it with a lie. Anna, as I've already said, becomes something of a Christ figure, and instead of allowing Kristoff, whose name means Christ-bearer, to rescue her from certain doom, Anna willingly sacrificed herself for her sister and for everyone else who was living under the curse that was symbolized by those folks standing up on the balcony, on the rampart of the castle, watching these events unfold. In the same way, Jesus, who could have liberated himself from the cross, who could have called down an army of angels to vindicate himself and to liberate himself from the cross. Instead, he willingly, like Elsa, walked over and put himself in harm's way, sacrificed himself for you and everyone else living under the curse of sin. Like Jesus, Anna willingly lays down her life, and it is this act of true love not a kiss from a handsome prince, but it was her own act of true love that saves her, but also saves all of the people she loves and knows, all of the people of Arendelle. And it is this choice of love that enables her, once she has laid her life down, to take it back up again. Later, creation is restored. If we were to continue watching that, we would see all the ice and snow disappear, and spring and summer would come back, and even Elsa's dangerous gift would be redeemed for a beautiful purpose. But let me go back to that idea that Anna willingly lays down her life. She willingly makes a choice to sacrifice herself for her sister, for the people of the world she knows, and for all of creation. And that is that love is a choice. Love, brothers and sisters, is a choice. And that's my first point for this morning. Love is a choice. Anna had a choice. Remember, as she was walking across the ice, trying to find Kristoff, calling out to him for salvation, begging that this cup might be taken from her, she sees her sister about to be slain by the evil one of this story. And so she puts her own need, her own desire, her own life aside for the sake of her sister, and puts herself in the way, intentionally, on purpose, of the enemy's blade. She sacrifices herself, gives up her last hope of being spared from this awful disease that was taking her life. It seems at first that he's going to be the only hope to spare her for the penalty for her sister's sin. So you see, love is not about feelings primarily. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's wonderful when the feelings are there, right? I mean, when we first fall in love, really what we're talking about is infatuation, chemistry, right? But then as we move forward from that place, once we've made that decision to love, our actions become so much more important than the feelings, don't they? I mean, if you've lived with anyone long enough, whether it's a spouse or your kids or your parents or brothers and sisters, whatever the case may be, you know that at some point you have to put the feelings aside, because sometimes our feelings make us want to choke the life out of each other, right? Make us want to do things that don't reflect the love that we're supposed to have. And so in the same way, Jesus calls us to love not just with feelings, in fact, primarily not with feelings, but instead with a decision and with actions. John chapter 14, verse 15, in an earlier part on the same discourse that Jesus is sharing with his disciples before the cross, he says, "If you love me, you will keep my commandments." In other words, if you love me, if your heart is really disposed that way towards me, if you've made that decision for me, you'll continue to make the decision. Anna had to put herself aside for the sake of what she knew she had to do if she truly loved her sister. She had to put herself aside. And so second, this morning, I also want to say, love is not primarily about you, or at least not primarily for your own benefit. When it comes to love, you're not the only person in the equation. And when it comes to people who love that follow Jesus, you're only 1/3 of the equation. Because there's at least two other folks in the relationship. There's the other person or people, and then there's God. We love better when we love God first. And that means we have to put ourselves at least at that 1/3 position in the relationship. I'm not suggesting that anybody should totally discard self-care. But love, true love, recognizes that it's not first and foremost about us. How many of you ever read the book, The Purpose-Driven Life by Rick Warren? Me too. Wonderful book. A lot of things I really agree with, and probably one or two things I'm not 100% on board with, but I think for the most part it's a valuable book, and it helps us to see our lives in a sense of purpose in God's plan. And you know, that book starts off with what admonition? It's not about you. And I don't know about you, but that really kind of pushed up against me the first time I read it. I had to read that line again, and a couple more times. But I also couldn't deny the truth in light of the gospel message. It's not about me. I was not created primarily for myself. The gospel message is not about how I find satisfaction in my life. It might take me there. In fact, I think if we really embrace it, it does, but that's not the main purpose. That's a side benefit. That is a byproduct of really truly living first for God and also for others. Love your neighbor as much as you love yourself. In fact, that's what Jesus says. And I'll get to that in just a second, but let me also point out that this is a hard thing for us to do. Because what happens when we come into this world as infants? We come in with nothing, not even language, right? So what did we start out doing? Any of y'all remember the first thing that happened when you got here? You probably started crying because you were cold and you were suddenly yanked out into this bright light, and there you are in the delivery room, and there's faces that you don't understand, sights, and light is pouring into your brand new eyeballs, and there's sounds coming into your brand new ears, and you don't know how to make sense of them, and you're probably hungry, and so you start crying. In fact, the doctors and the nurses in the labor and delivery room, they want to hear you start crying because they know everything's working right. And the reason we start crying is because that is our first form of communication. From the very beginning, we are designed to want only for ourselves. And our whole job as infants is to get the grown-ups in our lives who have learned how to use their limbs and balance and things like that, and can grasp things and can clean us up and can feed us, is to get them to do what we want. Now, the hope is that somewhere along the way, as we begin to get a little bit bigger and we learn how to walk and we learn how to talk and we learn how to do things with our hands and our feet and we learn how to go to the bathroom for ourselves and feed ourselves, that we can sort of start to move away from this self-centeredness that was kind of born into us. And we can begin to learn that love isn't just about receiving for ourselves. In fact, Matthew chapter 22, when Jesus is asked what's the most important law, here's what he says. Matthew 22, verses 36 through 40, he's asked this question, "Teacher, which commandment in the law is greatest?" And here's Jesus' answer. He said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul." And he says, this is the greatest and first commandment. So Jesus answers the question, but he's not done yet. He says, and a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments, Jesus says, hang all of the law and the prophets. In other words, everything else in all the Bible that they knew at that time, everything in God's words, both the law and the prophets, that's the sum total of the Hebrew Scriptures, the Old Testament. Everything hangs on those two things. Love God with everything you've got. Love your neighbor just as much as you love yourself. It's not about you. Not primarily. I'm just a piece of the puzzle. Third and finally, let me share this with you. Love never tears down. Love always builds up. Even when love has to be hard. Even when love has to be tough. Y'all remember that tough love? I hope you still practice it from time to time so that you're not enabling everybody in your life to take advantage of everybody else in your life, including yourself. Sometimes love does have to be tough. As we're teaching our kids to do things like stand up and walk and move around and communicate and function as members of a community, they have to learn that love isn't always tough, that sometimes the best thing you want for your kids and other people in your life is not to enable them to continue not to grow. But that's different from tearing down. Tearing down and destroying people is the job of the accuser. Did you notice that Hans plays the role of the accuser for Elsa? I mean, if you watched earlier in that movie, he puts her in prison, he puts her in chains, and that's what the devil wants to do to you. He wants you to be so pinned up by your past sins that your hands are held in shackles and chains, and that you're locked in a prison of your own making. Hans, like the devil, takes the truth that Elsa's sin has affected all of the world and has separated her from her sister, and he takes that and twists it into something else and says the sister's already dead. There's no hope of restoring that relationship. And the only hope of restoring Summer is for her to die, is for Elsa to die. He tells her rightly that she has to face up to what she's done, but the only way he says that she can do it is if she dies. What we find out the actual truth is that there's somebody else who's going to pay a sacrifice for her sin. He also tells Anna that there's no hope for a cure, as his wooing of her has only been a deception. He finally reveals that to her when he thinks it's too late for Anna to do anything about it, and says to her, it's too bad that there's nobody out there left to love you, because her parents are gone and Elsa has run away. The truth of the matter is, the only reason that Elsa has separated herself from Anna is because she believes it's the best way to protect her from her power, because she's hurt her sister with it in the past. The Bible says the devil is our accuser in Revelation chapter 12, verse 10, and that's the kind of thing he wants you to know about your own life, but he also wants you to help him tear down others. He's telling you a lie that the only way to make yourself feel better about your sin is to elevate yourself above others by tearing them down from their places. If he can get you to do that, he's got you firmly in his grasp, and you're fighting for his hateful cause. The Bible also calls him the father of lies in John chapter 8, verse 44. Lies and accusations are not things that build up, but instead tear down. We've already heard that love has a very different character. So I'm going to read to you just a piece of that ultimate definition of love that we heard a moment ago from 1 Corinthians chapter 13. I'm going to read from verses 4 through 7. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. And this line, I remember memorizing the King James Version as a kid in Sunday school class, where it said, love vaunteth not itself, and I had no idea what that meant. But I memorized it, and now I know that it means love does not insist on its own way. It's not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Here's the main point for this morning. Love is self-sacrificial. And the greatest love that has ever been has paid the ultimate price. When Jesus was in the garden before the crucifixion, he prayed earnestly that this cup might be taken from him. He knew that this was going to hurt. Jesus was not God in the illusion of humanity. Jesus was God in the flesh. This was going to hurt. So the Son prays to the Father, Lord, if there's any other way that this can be done, take this cup from me. But you know, I kind of think that maybe as he was walking to the cross, he looked over on the people that he was there for. And he looked at me, and he looked at you, as we had collapsed under the weight of our own sin like Anna on the ice. And he could not let the enemy's blade come down on us without putting himself in the way. That's the beginning of the gospel message right there. Jesus put himself in harm's way for you and for me, for all of humanity, for anyone that would receive it. Love is self-sacrificial, after the fashion of the greatest love that has ever been and still exists today. A love that is not kept only for God himself, not only for Jesus, love that is shared with you and me. So you see, that's why I say it's only the first part of the gospel. The gospel is incomplete if it stops there with our acceptance of that love for ourselves. Because remember, it's not just about us. It's not just about you. It's not just about me. It's about every person who still needs to hear and understand that message. It's about every person who is yet to be loved or to understand that they are loved. So here's our question for consideration for this morning, because I can't let you go home from this message without it making a personal claim on you. What is one sacrifice that you can make for the sake of loving God and others? Probably most of you have done this before in many different ways. But what's one more thing you can do? If I were to say to you, we all need to do better at this, yep, that's true, but that would just be kind of a global statement that, yeah, we need to get better at loving. But, I learned a long time ago, if you don't pick one thing, when you've got a mountain of stuff in front of you, you'll never do any of it. So just take one thing, one sacrifice, one thing more you can do for the sake of loving God and loving others, for putting someone else first and letting them know that God loves them too. What's one thing you can do? Because God did not intend for us to bottle this love up for ourselves. He intended us to share it with others.